This video is sponsored by Qonversion.io. What's up YouTube, this is Dennis Panuta for tutorials.eu. In this 2.5 hour long course, you are going to learn how to first of all build a game called Cookie Clicker. Well, just a simple cookie clicker game, very basic. But then what's more important, you're going to see how to implement monetization. So we're going to implement an in-app purchase feature as well as a subscription feature. And we will do that using the Google Play console, so the Play Store, so to speak. And we're using Qonversion.io, a very powerful tool. You're going to learn more about them because they are the sponsor of this video in the later section of the course. But then we will use them in order to set everything up in the most efficient way. It's really amazing. It will make your life so much easier when it comes to monetizing your apps. But not just that, it will even allow you to do A/B testing and all kinds of amazing things. So we will start building the cookie clicker and then we will go into monetization after. If you don't know any game development yet, I would recommend that you check out our YouTube video, which is for free. Just check out the link in the description or the info card, and there you can learn more about that. And then definitely come back and follow along, because I'm not explaining all the details in depth, but I'm really just explaining how to build the game in general, build it, and then monetize it. And by the way, if you're only interested in the monetization part of this video, definitely check out the second part of this video where we go over everything in-app purchases related, as well as in the description we will add the link to the resource file. So there you can download our entire project. You can use that project to follow along at the point where we're not building the game itself anymore, but we're really focusing on the monetization part of things. So check that out. And also, if you think that's cool what we're doing here, hit the subscribe button. It really helps us out, and the like button. It helps us with the algorithm, and this allows us to create more videos for you that are going to be like this course in the future. So thanks a lot for watching the video. Now let's look at what we're going to build specifically. All right, so what are we going to build? Well, the game itself consists of a simple cookie clicker game. Each time you click, the number goes up by 1. Simple enough. Every 30 seconds, for testing purposes obviously, we get an ad. So we'll have a button in our main menu where we can click to subscribe to remove ads from our app. This will call a conversion purchase method to buy the subscription we set up on Qonversion and on the Play Store. Then a permission check is done and the ads stop being displayed if a valid subscription is detected. Also, as a bonus, we can purchase cookie skins to change the look of our clickable cookie. Everything also set up through the Qonversion SDK. Speaking of, what is Qonversion.io? Let's get a more in-depth look at them and why they are going to be so useful for today's project. So Qonversion is a platform to implement and manage your in-app purchases in a way more streamlined and simple way. Mainly focused on mobile development, it offers direct implementation of Google Play Store and the Apple App Store IAPs and subscription plans. And IAP stands for in-app purchases. Getting in-app purchases to work through the traditional way of directly using the Google Play billing library brings a big amount of work with it. From validating data to managing renewals and cancellations, or preventing fraud and supervising your analytics to know how your app is performing like. Usually this asks for a huge time investment on the development side. But in Qonversion, you just need to set it up on their website. Add the ID from Google and Apple, and showing them in your app is just a simple method away. We even get features like A/B testing, where you can directly compare your products with one another to see which one performs better. So showing one product to some of your users and another slightly different one to the rest of the users. A really good and quick way to optimize your earnings. So let's get into it. To be able to follow along, you will need to create an account on their website. But don't worry, Qonversion is totally free to start. So let's get started. All right, so let's get started by creating the simple cookie clicker game. And therefore I'm going to select the 2D template to the core here. And you see my version is 21.2.13f1, but any later Unity version should be fine for this project. All right, once our project is loaded, let's go ahead and add the assets to it. So I have these cookie clicker assets that I would like to add to my project. You can find the link to them in the description below. I'm just going to drag them directly into my assets. All right, now let's open up this folder and you will find a bunch of files in it. The first one that we're going to use is the texture checker tablecloth. So let's drag that in there and let's change the position a little bit. I'm going to position it at 0, 0, -9. And then I'm going to scale it down a bit. So 0.4 towards all axes. Now, if we want to see it properly, let's just check if our camera is positioned accordingly. I really want to make sure that we are at the position of 10. And then we're looking down. So we're rotating by 90% here. And let's also rotate the table like this. At the same time, let's make sure that we have our game here. So we're going to look at our game from the top now. Here we can directly see what we have. So now let's position a plate on our game as well, specifically on the cloth. So I'm going to drag the plate HD in there and I'm going to position it at 0, 0, -12. And then the rotation will be 90 degrees as well towards the x-axis. And then I'm gonna downsize it. So it's going to be 0.3. Now you see that it's not really visible, so you can change the y coordinate to something like 0.05, for example. Okay, now we see the plate, and you see that's how it's going to look like in the game, more or less, right? Depending on the aspect ratio that you're taking. So in 16:9, that's what it's going to be, but we're just going to leave free aspect for now. All right, next I'm going to create a user interface. Therefore, I'm going to create a new canvas here, where I'm going to change the perspective to be world space. And then I'm going to change the position of it to be 0, 0, and -7.5. And then the width is going to be 1, and the height is going to be 1 as well. Then I'm going to have a rotation for the x-axis and change the main camera to be the event camera for that user interface. Now let's go ahead and add an image to it. So here UI, and I'm going to use image here and call this image background. Now I'm going to select the background simple asset, which is this one that we have here, background simple. I'm going to set it as the background source. So source image is going to be the sprite here, background simple. Now here, I'm going to change its position to be -0.5 so that it's put down a little bit. And then the width is going to be 5 and the height is going to be 5 as well. Now it's going to be over here on top of the plate, as you see here in our preview. Now let's add Text Mesh Pro, and you can find it under Text Mesh Pro text. So it says can't add Text Mesh Pro to background because an image is already added. So let me just click on the canvas instead. Go ahead and add Text Mesh Pro. So here import TMP Essentials is what I'm going to import here. All right, I'm not going to need the extras. That's fine for me now. Now let's go ahead and add text here. So add a new mesh. So add a new UI and here Text Mesh Pro, text TMP. Now let's change the position of the text to be 0.07. And I'm gonna leave the width and height as it is, but I'm gonna scale it a little bit. So here, the scale will be 0.05 towards all directions. All right, now you see here, new text is what we find there at the bottom. So we're going to change the scale so we can use normal font numbers for the font size. Since if we didn't do that, the font size would always be in the 0 point something range, right? So now we can change the font size further down here to something like 7, for example, and then align it towards the center in both directions, like so. You see there we have the new text now. And so let me change that from new text to plate O cookies. All right, now let's duplicate this text and change the text here to cookies consumed. Okay, so this will be cookies consumed. And I'm going to change the font size to 5. It's not going to be bold, and I need to change the position a little bit. So the Y position will be at minus 0.5. So now let's duplicate this again and move it down to minus 1.4. And this time I'm going to set the font size to be a little larger. So something like 16. And the value itself will be 0. And this should be 16, not 17. As well as I'm going to make this bold. So there we have this bold 0 that is going to be down there. All right, next I'm going to add a button to my user interface here. So let's select button with Text Mesh Pro. And this button is not going to have any text. So let's get rid of this text entirely. The button should be clickable later on, but we want to, well, put it on top of the plate. Now you see the button is huge and it's taking the entire space of the screen, so to speak. So first of all, let's change the opacity of the image to 0. So the normal color here, let's set that to 0 for the A value. Okay, now you see the button is invisible, so to speak. And we can also change the button up a little bit. For example, I'm going to position it a little further down, something like 4.4 and minus 0.2. So the button is going to be a little bigger than the actual plate, which is fine because it just creates a better feeling. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a new item in here, which will be an empty object. And I'm going to call this one cookie position. So this is where I want the cookies to be spawned. And I'm going to set cookie position 0, 0, minus 12. And then the rotation for the X value will be 90. So inside, I'm going to add another empty object. And this empty object is going to be called crumble position. And I'm going to put that at 0, 0, minus 1. This is for where we're going to add the particles. So where the particles are going to spawn later on. So to be able to make our first playtest, let's set up the clicking and initialization of our game before adding any menu to it. Okay, next let's add the cookie, the plain cookie, to our cookie position. And I'm going to reset everything for that cookie. So here in the transform, go ahead and make sure to reset it. And you see the cookie will be at the same position as our plate. And I want it to be on top of our plate. Now you see that the size doesn't add up very well. So first of all, let's change the order in layer. So it's going to be on top of the plate. And then for now, let's downsize it a little bit. Something like 0.3 should be good enough. Maybe even 0.25. All right, next we're going to add a particle system to our application. Therefore, let's go to our crumble position and then add a particle system effect here. We can just call it as it is, particle system, that's fine. Let's change the settings up a little bit. So the duration should be a lot shorter, 0.2 seconds. Then I'm going to set looping to false. So I'm going to uncheck this. So it should only happen once. There shouldn't be no delay. The start lifetime will be 10 seconds, I'd say. The start speed, I'm going to use a range here. So 5 to 15. So we can use a random between two constants, and I'm going to use 5 up to 15. Then the start size will be starting from 0.1 all the way to 0.8. The start color, and that's where I'm going to play around with. So here I want to use random between two colors. First one is going to be this color here, E4953F. At least that's the one that I'm going to use here. And like this. And then the second color will be F8C895. I'm going to set the gravity modifier to 10. So that scales gravity defined in physics in the physics manager. And I'm going to set the gravity to be the world. So simulation space should be world. Now let's go over to emissions. So here I'm going to change the rate over time to be 50. I want to emit more particles per second. The shape will be a cone. So let's go over to shape, change that. So the cone should be with the angle of 25, but the radius, I'm going to up it a little bit to 1.8. The radius should be 1.8 and the radius thickness is going to be 0.55 in my case. Now let's also add collision to the world. So we go over to not noise, but collision here. Let's activate collision. We're going to change the type to be world. There will be 3D mode. I'm going to dampen it a little. So 0.2 should be good. I don't want to have any bounce. So I'm going to set bounce to 0. I want to visualize the bounce. And I'm going to add a lifetime to the trails. So here on the trails, let's activate trails. And the mode will be particles. The ratio will be 1. The lifetime should be a lot shorter, however. So 0.01 with the minimum vortex of 0.2. And I believe the rest can stay the same. So these are just settings that we played around with. I would recommend that you also just play around with the different settings to see what kind of particle effect you can get with this. So we'll need a new material, and let's go ahead and go over to our assets folder and create a new folder here. And in here, I want to create a material and set it to particle standard unlit. So here, create, and then go for material. Let's call this crumble. Now here I need to make some changes. So first of all, the shader. So I'm going to change this to particle standard unlit, as I said. Therefore, let's go over to particles and use standard unlit here. I'm not going to use the opaque render mode, but the cutout render mode. Then I need to make sure that I'm setting the albedo, and you can find it under our texture. So here, click on this, and I'm going to use our crumble here. Now back in the particle system, I want to use our crumble as the material. So here on the renderer at the very bottom, I want to change the material. So not the default particle system, but actually our asset that we created. So our crumble asset. And as the trail material, I'm not going to use the default line, but the default particle. So great. The only issue now left is that they just fall through the table and plate. So you see they're just falling through, and we can really not see much here, even like the image. So the particle system might be doing its thing, but we don't really see much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my plate here, and I'm going to add a box collider to it. So here, add component and search for box collider. And I'm just going to add that in there, and let me change the size to, let's say, 40 times 40. So now we have this bigger box collider that is going to be underneath our plate, so to speak. And now if we run this, then we should see the crumbs staying on the plate, at least some of them. Let's run again. And you see some stay on top, but some fall through still. And then if we look at our particle system when we play it, we can see that the crumbs, they're pushing it, well, towards this direction. So that's the cone in which direction the particles are going. So we need to, well, we can rotate the particle system by, for example, well, I think minus 90 degrees will be better. So now it will push the crumbs on top. So let's run it again. And you see the particles are being pushed towards the top. Let's restart this. And you might see that sometimes it might happen that a crumb or two are still falling through our physics. So let's restart it. If you realize that that happens, what you can do is you can push up your position of the particle system a tiny bit. Then that shouldn't happen. So now you see like the crumbs, they are going all over the place, like all directions. So I'm going to leave it at 0. That should be fine now. Okay, so that's how we can use the crumb or the particle system to create crumbs. Pretty good. So looking good so far, I'd say. That's a great point to make a quick break. In the next part, we're going to set up the game manager for our cookie clicker game. Quick pause. The video that you're currently watching is just a fraction of the entire course that I have to offer. So I built this complete Unity masterclass course in which you're going to learn how to build real games and how to build them from scratch. So you're going to learn how to build a platformer game, how to build a Space Invaders clone, how to build a Fruit Ninjas clone and optimize it for mobile and export it for mobile as well, how to build a first-person shooter game, and finally how to build a tycoon game, similar to Adventurist, which is an endless game. So if you want to become a real game developer, definitely check out the course. You can find the link in the description and you will get the course with a huge discount. So don't hesitate, as you will not only get the course, but you will also get it in a structured manner with all of the code, as well as a Q&A section with a 5-star support. So get the course now. I hope to see you there. All right, next we're going to set up the game manager. Therefore, I created a new folder in my assets folder called scripts, and in there I'm going to create my new C# script that I'm going to call game manager. So the game manager is going to take care of things such as our score, for example, and so forth. So let's open up the game manager once we created it in Visual Studio. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to add is going to be a game object. So public game object called cookie, and then a public transform called cookie position. So this will be the actual cookie game object, and this will just take care of the position of the cookie. Then we're going to create a spawn cookie method. So public void spawn cookie, where we need to pass the game object, which I'm going to call cookie. So here we're going to instantiate, so we're going to create the cookie. So here cookie with the cookie position dot position, with the cookie position and rotation as well. In the start method, I'm going to spawn a cookie. So once the game manager is loaded, we're going to spawn a cookie. And here we need to pass in the cookie that we want to spawn. All right, now let's save this game manager and let's go over to our project again. Let's create a new empty game object, which we're gonna call game manager. And let's reset this game manager as well as drag in the script to our game manager. Then I need to make sure that I write instantiate here, obviously my game manager, because Unity said that it didn't like what I wrote there. So maybe I should use Visual Studio 2019 and not 2022 yet. Okay, now in our game manager, let's make sure that we drag in the cookie as well as the cookie position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder here, which I'm going to call prefabs. So these will be my prefabricated files. I'm going to drag in the plane in there like this. And then I want to also get the crumble in there. And the crumble, so the plane crumble was actually my particle system. So let me rename this. Let's call this one plane crumble. And let's drag it into the prefabs folder as well. Now we can delete those two from our scene. So let's delete the plane and the crumble because we have them as prefabs here. So we can rebuild them dynamically, so to speak. And let's go over to our game manager again. Let's make sure that the cookie position is dragged in here as the cookie position. So this transform here, or the transform of this game object. And then the cookie itself will be our plane. So this is the plain generic cookie that we had. And now if we run our game, we should see that our cookie is spawning. So there we are. It spawned just after we had loaded the game. Now let's create another method that will allow us to do something once we clicked on a cookie. So I'm going to create a new method in here, public void clicked on cookie. And in here, I want to increment the amount of cookies that I consumed. And I want to display the changes to our cookies consumed text. Therefore, I need to create the objects here or assign them here. So I'm going to make them public so that I can edit them inside of the Unity editor. So the first one is going to be a text mesh pro GUI called cookies consumed text. And then I'm going to have a public float cookies consumed. And now finally in Visual Studio 2019, let's make sure that we are adding TM Pro here, because otherwise this class would not be available otherwise. Okay, so now we can go ahead and consume cookies. So this float, we can increment it. We could have used an integer here as well, obviously, but let's just keep on going with the float that we have. So cookies consumed is going to be at 0, and then we're going to use the cookies consumed text.text to set the cookies consumed to string value. And then actually once we clicked on it, we don't want to set the cookies consumed to 0. We want to do it in our start method. So let me copy this code. What we want to do here is we actually want to increment cookies consumed by using the increment operator double plus. So on start, we're setting the cookies consumed to 0. We are setting the text to be whatever cookies consumed is, and we're spawning a cookie. And then each time we click on the cookie, we're going to increment the amount of cookies that we consumed, and we're going to display the change directly on our user interface. So let's save this game manager and let's get back to Unity. And then let's make sure that our game manager has the cookies consumed text assigned to it, which is this text here. So let me drag that over here. Actually, let me rename this. We can call this one cookies consumed text. Will be a little more obvious of what it does. And then the button itself should then call this method that we just created, this cookies consumed method. Therefore, let's click on click here and select from our scene the game manager itself. Then once we selected it, we can go ahead and select the clicked on cookie method. So this will now display the amount of cookies that we clicked on. So each time I click on the cookie, you see the value is incremented by 1. Now we can scale this up a little bit and we can see it a little better now. Okay, so that's what we wanted to achieve with our game manager. Unfortunately, the particles aren't displayed. To have a reference to the particles that this specific cookie has, we'll need to create a script that'll hold the specific particle prefab. That way, when we'll add a new cookie, we can just easily swap those out without any issue. Let's create a new script, which I'm going to call cookie. Inside of it, so each cookie should have crumbles. So let's create a game object, which will be the crumbles. And then you would just need to fetch that from the game manager script and instantiate it. So in the game manager, let's create a new variable for the cookie script of the cookie prefab and the crumble position. So here I'm going to go all the way up here, create a public cookie spawned cookie. So I'm going to call it, and then a public transform, which gives me the position of the crumble. So crumble position. And now in our spawn cookie method, we can get our spawned cookie. How can we do that? Well, in here, we can just go ahead and instantiate the item. Let me get rid of this. We can instantiate the item and at the same time, store it inside of spawned cookie. Now the problem is spawned cookie is of type cookie and instantiate is of type game object. So we need to make sure that we are getting the component of type cookie here. So component of type cookie and the brackets. So let me put this into a separate line so we can read it a little better. So we instantiate the cookie and then we get the cookie script from it. And now when we click on a cookie, we also want to instantiate the crumble. So instantiate with the spawned cookie. There we get the crumble, getting the crumble position dot position, as well as the crumble position dot rotation. And this will be the local rotation. Okay, let's save these two scripts. So the cookie has crumbles now, nothing else, really just the crumbles, but we need to assign it. So let's go back to Unity. And here, first of all, let's go over to our prefabs. So now our plane needs to make sure that it has this cookie script. So here, search for your cookie script, assign it here, and now you need to add the crumbles. All right, and now if we run the game, it says that the variable crumble position of game manager is not assigned yet. So let's go over to the game manager. We see that we need to assign the crumble position. So here I'm going to drag in the crumble position or the crumble position that I had, and the spawned cookie will be something that is set to none, but will be spawned dynamically. So let's run the application again. Let's see if we get an error still here at the bottom. It doesn't seem like it. And then let's create a couple of crumbles. So you see, there we are. Each time we click on it, we're creating a bunch of new plain crumbles. All right, so now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a main menu to our game. So first of all, let's set up a second canvas object and call it menu. So here UI canvas, and then I will rename it to menu. Now I'm going to change the render mode to screen space camera, and I'm going to drag in my main camera directly as the render camera in here. Then I'm going to change the plane distance to 1. Okay, inside of this menu, I'm going to create a new image. Now for this image, I'm going to make sure that it stretches the values. So here, stretches towards all sides. I'm going to position it at 0, 0, and it will be at 0, 0 towards the right and bottom. As you see, it takes basically the entire screen. Now let's change the color up a little bit. I don't like this color too much. I'm going to use something like 323232, which is this gray color that you can see here. Now let's make sure that we put this game on the side so we still see our scene. So in case you see that a UI element peeks through your user interface, so let's say you see the plate down here, then you can just move the order of the menu in the layers to something like 10. Then you really make sure that the UI is going to be on top. So let's rename this image. Let's call this main menu. And now inside of it, I'm going to create a Text Mesh Pro item. So here UI Text Mesh Pro, and I'm going to change the position to -50 on the Y coordinate. The width is going to be 275. The height can stay at 50. And then on top of that, I'm going to change the name to something like Cookie Clicker, as well as the font size to 30 and make it bold. And then I'm going to duplicate this text to create a subtitle, which I'm going to call The Game. Actually, we can even like add empty spaces in between the game like this with an additional in here. This will not be bold, and I need to change the position of it a little bit as well, and the font size. So let's change that to 20, for example. Actually, we can also do it via spacing between characters. Then we can call it The Game in normal writing. Okay, The Game. Now we need to change the position of it, however. So the Y position, I'm going to set that to minus something like 90. So we have Cookie Clicker The Game. Yeah, we can call it Cookie Clicker. We can also call it something like, I don't know, Plate-O Cookies. That would be a nice name, right? Plate-O Cookies. However you want to call the game. Let's also make sure, by the way, that this text is going to be centered, because otherwise it looks a little off. All right, now I'm going to add a button in there. So UI item, and this one will be a button, Text Mesh Pro. Let's call it subscribe. Now this button will have a position of 125 negative. So the thing is, let me actually see 16 to 9. I feel like my entire main menu has the wrong position. So I need to really make sure that I have the right position, because they should be all a little further up. So let me make sure that I have the right settings here, which all here should be fine. Now we could play around with that, or we can move the UI around a little bit. So let me actually jump to it. Yeah, let's use all of those, connect all of those and push it up a little bit. So I think maybe this will be better. Yeah, you can really play around with it and see how it works best for you. You can use the same values I have here. So you see like -50 for the button seems to be a good value. And let's change the button up a little bit, however. So first of all, I'm going to change the button color to have no alpha at all. So it's going to be pretty much invisible. But in order to be able to see the text again, we can change its color to white. So we have this text here, and we can change the vertex color to white, like so. And then we see the text of the button. So let's change the text to be subscribe to remove ads, like so. Even though I'm going to change the font size a bit, so make it 16. You can also make it italic and underline it so that it's really going to pop out. And lastly, to have it for our testing purposes, let's set up a single cookie skin for now. For that, you'll just need to create another button and change the source image to our simple background, width and height to 100. So again, we can take all of those. Let me put them even further up. Plate-O Cookies, and then we will have time underneath here for another button. So I'm gonna create another button in here, and as a background for that additional button, I'm going to use the simple background, this one here, and then let me change the width and height, something like that. Let's see how it's gonna pan out if I move it down. I think that will be too much. Let's do 70 and 70. This looks more like it, something like that. This will then be where I want to be able to put my cookie. So inside of it, actually we can get rid of the text, but we are going to add an image in there. And here for that image, we can use our cookie. Okay, so let me select the cookie, and I'm just going to select the chocolate chip here, for example. Okay, and there you are. This is how it's gonna look like. Maybe the chocolate chip image is a little too big, so we could change that to maybe like 80% so that it really fits into our button roughly. And now the very last thing before we start with the backend, we need a toggle button to toggle the menu on and off. So we can just create another button outside of our main menu game object. So here, create another UI item, another button. This will take care of toggling the menu. So toggle menu and maybe even toggle menu button. So to keep things simple, we'll mark this as being open with an X sign and closed with a plus sign. So when we want to open it, we see the plus sign and we can click on it, and then we see the X sign to close it again. So this will help us to open the menu. So I want it to be at the top left hand side of my user interface. So you can see here, it should be here somewhere at the top. Now I need to position it a little further down. So maybe like half of the size of the button or height of the button. So let's say we take a height of 25 pixels. So let's say 12 down, minus, well, maybe 15 down. So it still has a little margin towards the top side. And then the width should also be 25. And I'm going to make sure that it's going to be at plus 15 here so that it's going to move a little bit. Now the text can be an X or a plus. So here I'm also going to make sure that I have the simple background here because the image doesn't look great for it. So here's simple background and the text should be white. Otherwise you can't see it properly, right? Okay. So this should look a little better and fits more with our user interface that we have. Now in order to toggle our menu, we can go over to our game manager again. In here, let's go ahead and set up a toggle menu method. So public void toggle menu. So just a disclaimer here, it is advised to separate your menu management and your game management. But since this game is just for testing and teaching purposes, we won't need to do that. It would just be too much work for this little project, so to speak, right? But you should, if you intend in making money off of this app, really make sure that you set it up properly where you have your menu management outside of your game management. So just a different script, so to speak. So inside of our game manager, we need to set up some more variables. So first of all, the game object, that will be the menu item, and then the text, because we want to be able to make it either a plus or an X, right? Text mesh pro UI or UGUI, and this will be the menu toggle icon. All right, now inside of toggle menu, so inside of this method, we can check if menu item active self, which means the local active state of this game object is being read. So if it's active, then do the following. Set the menu item to be inactive. So set active false and make sure that the menu toggle icon text is going to be a plus. And otherwise, make sure that the menu item is active. So here true, and set the toggle icon to be an X. So here text is gonna be an X, like so. Okay, and that will be already it. Now we can test this because this toggle menu will now, if it's active already, then it will make the menu item inactive, which means it will hide our menu and the text will be set to plus, and otherwise it's going to do the opposite. So it's going to set the menu visible, active, and will display an X so that we can close the menu again. So let's get back to our Unity editor. And here, let's make sure that our button has this method assigned to it. So here on the click event, let's add our game manager from our scene. And then go to toggle menu method and select that. And at this point, go over to the game manager and make sure that you drag in your main menu here into your game manager and the toggle text. So the menu toggle text, which is this one here from the toggle menu button as the menu toggle icon. And now by default, you see that I have this plus sign. Let's see if this is going to run properly. Okay, the menu is active by default. Okay, so I need to change the text by default to be an X. And what we can also do is we can hide the main menu by default. So let's run this again. And then, yeah, in that case, actually, it would make sense to have it as a plus. So let me change the text again to a plus and run it, because then once we click on the plus sign, you can see the menu pops up and then we can hide it again. Now, you see in my scale or in my app, now the cookie looks a lot smaller than it looked in the free aspect ratio. So let's actually change the size a little bit, because I'm not super happy with it. So let's make sure the menu is visible again, and let's change the size of our cookie and drag it down a bit. So here, this will be this button here. Let's drag it down to, let's say, -100 for this case, and let's make it bigger. And then we can also make the image bigger as well. All right, I think this looks a little better, but it really depends on what you prefer and how you want to optimize your UI. But overall, you see, we can hide it and show it, and I'm going to deactivate it by default. All right, so that was the main menu. You see, it takes a little while to set it up. The next part is going to be the interesting part, where we're going to actually take care of how to make money with the game by displaying ads or purchasing additional cookies. So let's look at that. All right, so let's look at how to implement ads in our game. We're going to look at skippable ads to test our subscription feature. We are not going to go over rewarded ads or other content in this video. We'll just take care of the subscription feature as well as the in-app purchases. If you want to learn more about skippable and rewarded ads, you can find the link in the description. We have a video about that as well. So first of all, make sure that you are logged in. So if you're not logged in, create an account with Unity and make sure to log in. Then you can go over to your project settings. So edit project settings, and there you will find ads down here. So here you need to make sure that you select your organization, and then we're going to need to create a project ID. Now you will be asked whether your app is directed towards children younger than 13. And in my case, it's not primarily targeted to children under the age of 13. So I'm gonna be saying no. Now the window will change and it will display a button called off here at the top hand side, which means that ads are not yet turned on. So click on it to turn ads on. This will take a little while. You see there's a lot of setup that happens and importing that happens in the background. So then once the ads are turned on and the packages are imported, you will find the ads package here. So the current version in my case is 3.7.5 and the latest available version is 4.0, which is totally fine. So now on the screen, you also see whether you're in test mode, then you see the game ID for Android as well as iOS apps. Now let's go over to the dashboard by clicking on the dashboard button. This will then open up the dashboard.unity3d website where you need to sign into your Unity account once again. Once you are in the back end, you will find that you can select your projects up here. Then you make sure that you are on the monetization screen. But what we're specifically interested in is add units. So here, click on add units. At this point, you can scroll down and you can find Unity Mediation. Unity Mediation, why use it? Well, these tools enable quick network setup, easy waterfall management, and clear reporting to take action and continue. So first of all, let's complete the activation, and then Unity Mediation will open up as an option. I use Unity's mediation to serve ads to my projects from multiple ad sources. That's what we want to select. So just press OK. Make sure to read the license agreement. You can accept it. You can click on accept and select the checkbox. Now at this point, you see the Unity Ad Units panel with your iOS and Android codes and also a bunch of pre-made ad units. So here you see there are some ad units that were prepared for you. And an ad unit is a collection of ad format settings for content serving at a single surfacing point in your game, used to designate the surfacing point to serve rewarded or interstitial ads You can also use add units to configure advanced settings such as add types and whether to allow skipping. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to initialize the Unity Ads SDK in our project. Inside of scripts, let's go ahead and create a new script. Go ahead and call the script ads initializer. All right, so this ads initializer, it shall take care of a bunch of things. So this ads initializer should use the Unity Ads initializer interface. Therefore, can use Unity engine dot advertisements or advertisements. And then we can use the Unity Ads initialization listener. So this is an interface. Once we add that, you see that we need to implement all members explicitly. And by doing so, you see it creates those methods for us. So for now, it's throwing errors. I'm going to replace this with debug log. All right, but that's not all. I want to have a method that will be called on awake as well as on initialize ads. Therefore, I'm going to set up a couple of fields. So I'm going to set up a serialize field. So force Unity to serialize a private field, which we need to do here with a Android, and this will be private, Android game ID. And I use an underscore to make sure that this is displayed as private. And let me actually copy this because I need to create another one for the iOS game ID. So iOS game ID. And then 2 booleans. So serialize field here with a boolean, which will be the test mode being set to true, because we need to make sure we are in test mode. And actually, let me use a capital M here. And then another boolean, which will be enable per placement mode set to true as well. And finally, a private string, which will give me the game ID. So here, game ID, or which will store the game ID. So now let's set up the awake method here. So it's similar to the start method, but it's called at the different point in time. And here I want to initialize my ads. So how do I initialize my ads? Well, I need to create a method for so public void initialize ad. And now what is it that I want to do in here? Well, first of all, I need to set my game ID. And how do I get my game ID? Well, I get it depending on which tool I'm using. So I'm going to use application platform to find out which operating system I'm using. So if I'm using the iPhone player, then I know that this is going to be the iOS game ID. However, if I'm not using the iPhone player, then I know that I have the Android game ID that I can set. Okay. And then I'm going to use advertisement.initialize with the game ID as well as the mode. So you see this advertisement initialize has 2 parameters. So one is game ID and the other one is the test mode. And I'm just going to pass in the test mode, which is what we set up here, whether we are in test mode or not. So currently we will be in test mode. So now we get the game ID, which we set here inside of initialize ads, which we call once this script is awoken. So once the game object that holds the script is awoken. And once the initialization is complete, event will be triggered, and if there's a failed response, then this event will be triggered and we will display the problems in our debug log. We can get rid of the start and update method. We're not going to use it for now. So now we need to make sure that we add this script to a game object. So let's save the script. Let's get back to Unity. And in my case, I'm just going to add it to my GameManager. Okay, so I'm going to add this new script, add initializer in here. So now we can set our game IDs that we have gotten from our project settings. And so here the Android ID will be a 23. We see if that's also the order. Yes. And this one will be 22 in my case. So you now need to make sure that you are adding your own IDs in here. So they will not be the same as with my case. Now this initialize method has additional parameters or additional overloads with additional parameters. So for example, the enable per placement load. So here I'm going to pass the enable per placement mode as well as the initialization listener. So we need to initialization listener because otherwise these methods will not be executed for initializing ads. So once the initialize method is done, then our listener will be triggered and it will call either completed or failed. Okay, and that's what we needed, this enable per placement mode, as well as the test mode, the game ID, and well, the listener itself, because our class implements this ads initialization listener interface. All right, now let's save this. Let's go back to our project in Unity and let's drag this ads initializer script directly into our game manager. Now you could create another game object for that. I'm just going to put it into the game manager. Now here we need to make sure that we add the ID. So how do you get the ID? Well, on one one hand, you could get it from the browser, as we've seen, right? So here we can copy this Android ID, for example, and put it in here. And then the iOS ID, in my case, it was just slightly different here, 22, for example. So now once we have added that, let's run the application or the game and check out the console, and we see Unity ads initialization complete. So that's great news, because we now know that our ads are being loaded. Now, obviously we don't display any ads yet, but that's something we're going to take care of now. So what we're going to add is a skippable interstitial ad. We need to use the load function to load ad content to an ad unit, and the show function to show the ad. In the SDK versions 3.7.0 and higher, you can use the iUnity ads load listener and the iUnity ads show listener callbacks to implement logic for when content succeeds or fails to load or show prospectively. So you can check those out, project settings, and your ads. You see, these are the versions that we are using, in my case 3.7.5, which is great. So let's stop running this and let's create a new script. Interstitial ad example. All right, let's run into this script. So this should inherit from the iUnity ads load listener and the iUnity ads show listener. So actually, let's add the namespace here. Otherwise, it will be a pain to write all of it out. And luckily, that's something that the IDE can help us out with. So first the iUnity ads load listener, and then the iUnity ads show listener. So I want to add those two in here. Now you can go ahead and add the members. So I did it explicitly down here. Either way is fine. But now let's look at what we need other than that. So first of all, we need to have another serialize field so that we can adjust it directly in Unity, right? That's the idea behind this serialize field. Even though it's a private variable, we can still access it in Unity. That's the idea behind the serialize field keyword. And this will be the Android add unit ID, which will be interstitial underscore Android. So here interstitial iOS, like this. And then I need to have an ID, which will be the add unit ID, because I want to make sure that this is going to run on Android as well as the iOS version. Okay, so in the awake method, which we have not implemented here, think. So void awake, inside of it, we need to set the add unit ID. So add unit ID, that's where we're gonna get the application platform again. So application platform is gonna be runtime platform dot, and is it going to be the iPhone player? If so, then set it as the iOS add, see, go on, help me with the suggestions here, empty space, iOS add unit ID, otherwise use the Android add unit ID. Now you see we have a bunch of implemented methods. Add show click, add show complete, add show failure, add show start, ads loaded, ads failed to load. And then we have the start and update method. Let's get rid of those. So what I want to take care of instead is to load an ad. And therefore I'm going to create my own method. So public void load ad, and then another one that will show the ad. Okay, so public void show ad. So and now in the load ad, that's where I'm going to, first of all, write a debug log statement so that I can see what's up. So loading ad is what it should say, and the add unit ID, as well as it should load advertisements. So advertisement or advertisement.load with the add unit ID, and this as the load listener, because if we're not listening, then none of these complete methods would be called. Okay, now inside of the show ad method, I'm going to also debug log something. And here I'm going to show the add unit ID, and then I'm going to use advertisement show with the add unit ID and this as the listener. So you see now we have the two listeners added. So this Unity ads load listener and the Unity add show listener. So these two interfaces, we're using both of them, and we're making sure that this class itself is the listener. So here this load listener needs to be added. Now you can throw the not implemented error here, but here you could optionally execute code if the add unit successfully loaded content. So if you want to run something specific, now you could just say debug log loaded add. Okay, and then here for the failed listener, you could go ahead and say debug log failed to load add. So then we have our add show click. I'm gonna keep it empty, so nothing to do there. You cannot obviously implement what should happen if you click on the ad. The same goes here for when the ad is completed and so forth. Okay, and let's go over here as well. Let's simplify this. All right, and finally on Unity add show start, same goes here. So if I didn't miss anything, we should be able to test this. So save the script. Let's go back to Unity. Let's add this to our game manager as well. So this interstitial add example, and you see this will be the interstitial Android and the interstitial iOS ads that should be displayed. So where do we get those values from? Where did I get the idea from these names? And I get them from here. So you see there are different types of ads. So the ad format is interstitial here, for example. You can just copy this name, interstitial Android, and you can paste it in here. And the same for the iOS one. So these are not just things that I came up with, generic like this. You can just copy them from there, whatever they're called there. All right, so now prior to publishing your game, enable the test mode by following the following steps. So from the monetize dashboard, we need to select our project here at the top. Make sure that you have it open. Then select the project settings from the navigation bar, which are the settings here. Then scroll down to the test mode section here, test mode, and there edit either the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, depending on which device you want to enable the test mode for. So for example, if I want to test it on Android, you need to select the override client test mode checkbox and then select the force test mode on here and then click on save. So now in the Unity editor, let's run it. And in case you don't see any result, go over to your settings here, project settings, and make sure that the test mode is enabled and that this on button here is enabled as well. So let's run it again and we will still not see any ads. So what is missing? Well, there is this one thing missing where we're actually showing an interstitial ad. So let's go to our ads initializer. So this one here, not the interstitial ads, but the ads initializer. And here, let's add another variable, public interstitial ad example, and call it interstitial ad example. And in the on initialization complete, so here, instead of just debugging or only debugging, we're going to use our interstitial ad example to load an ad. So here, if you look at our interstitial ad example, we had this load ad method, which we never called, but now we will load the ad. And then in here, on Unity ads loaded, let me see here, it will display loaded ad. Now you can use this placement ID here as well with placement ID and then the placement ID. All right, I didn't assign the interstitial ad example. Let me just add the script in there and let's run it again. And let's go over to our console and we see that the Unity initialization completed and the placement ID, well, it didn't show me the placement ID. Let me see if I just wrote the code there incorrectly, or I can use concatenation here just to be sure with the placement ID. Let's run it again. Then we should see the placement ID as well. So with the placement ID, interstitial Android, because we are testing or faking it as if we're running it on an Android device. Okay, so the ad works now. Let's set this up on every menu toggle. Then an ad should be played. So let's go over to our game manager script. And here we will need to have a reference to our interstitial ad example. It's going to be called interstitial ad example with a lower I. So, and I want to use this interstitial ad example inside of my toggle menu. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my interstitial ad example to show the ad and load the ad. Ad example dot load ad. Okay, now let's save this. And let's make sure that our game manager knows which interstitial ad example it should use. So let's drag this script in there as well. And let's run it. Let's see if we're going to see the ad popping up each time that we're clicking on the plus sign here. You see that it loads the ad each time that we're toggling. So even if we're closed or not closed, we're toggling anytime. So this could become annoying. You can obviously play around with your game manager and only display it once you are activating it. So once you're making it true here, for example. So once you're activating itself, set active and show ad. All right, but at this point you have your ad set up. Congratulations. You now got ads in your project. And remember that for learning more about it, you can always check out the documentation. It's really great. It really helps us out. Integration guide for Unity with Unity ads. So it's not that big of an article, but there are a lot more details if you want to know more about it. We're obviously still not done. We're going to now see how we can use Qonversion.io to help us out significantly when it comes to optimizing our ads. So now you have the complete cookie clicker game with ads and everything. Now it's time to finally add what we were all waiting for, in-app purchases and today's sponsor Qonversion.io. In the next video, we will go over using Google Play and Qonversion to set up a bunch of products and the complete process to get your Unity project running on an Android device with working ads and in-app purchases. And we will discover how easy it is to have a complete overview of every transaction in your Android app, optimizing your conversion rate and getting the most out of your project. Also in the description below, as well as the next video's description, you can find the link to the project we built today, in case you want to use that to follow along with the next part of this course. So thank you again to Qonversion.io to make this course possible, and I see you in the next part.